17. Candice Long. At around 1:30 a.m. one morning in early 2014, a man discovered a woman passed out with a little boy in her arms on his sister-in-law's porch. It was just 39 degrees Fahrenheit outside, and the child wasn't wearing a jacket. Unsure of what to do, the man dialed 911 and explained that he'd woken up to the sound of the child talking, but couldn't understand what he was saying. He further explained that he wanted to bring the strangers in from the cold, but that he didn't feel comfortable doing that since it wasn't his house. Later identified as 28-year-old Candice Long, the woman was so intoxicated that she was unable to walk on her own and needed help from Volusia County deputies. She was reportedly babysitting the toddler for his father, who'd left to run errands. Long was arrested on suspicion of child neglect, but insisted that it was all a misunderstanding. She admitted that she had been watching the boy earlier that evening, but that she believed she'd been relieved of her childcare duties when the toddler's grandfather returned home. The young woman seemed more annoyed than anything, as she described how she was trying to get someone to take care of the kid so she could get drunk and celebrate her birthday. According to Long's version of events, the boy was crying for his father, so she left the house in search of his dad, who she believed was visiting a friend nearby. She said the toddler must have followed her without her noticing, and remained adamant that she would go to trial if prosecutors refused to drop the charges. She stated, "I'm not going to get convicted of a damn felony when I wasn't supposed to be watching the kid. It's not my kid." Records show that Long was also arrested in 2022 for battery on a law enforcement officer. Unfortunately though, the outcomes of both cases are unclear. 16. Garrett Smith. Late one night in early 2015, a naked and seemingly drunk man streaked through the parking lot of an Anaheim, California apartment building and threw himself full force into the rear window of a resident's minivan, causing it to shatter. Parked next to the van was a car with a woman named Clarissa Vidrio behind the wheel. Vidrio was attempting to leave for her job as a third-shift security guard, but the night had different things in store for her. Terrified by what she saw in her rearview mirror, she threw the car into reverse and attempted to get away from the raging madman who'd smashed the window of her neighbor's van. But in her moment of panic, Vidrio accidentally backed into a fence. Later identified as 21-year-old Garrett Smith of Riverside, the suspect jumped headfirst onto the hood of the woman's car, then got thrown off the vehicle as Vidrio sped forward and struck the minivan. Smith ran from the scene and was captured by police about a mile from the apartment complex. He was arrested on suspicion of vandalism, being under the influence and resisting arrest. Footage of the incident quickly went viral, with many commenters debating on what drug they believe Smith had overindulged in that evening. One witness, Stephen Trinkle, told local station KTLA that the suspect was covered in blood and sweat. He was shocked that Smith was even capable of running after being hit by a car, stating, "That's bizarre." Vidrio was also in a state of disbelief over what she'd just experienced. During the encounter, she was seriously worried that she was going to die. She was less bothered by the fact that her car was totaled than she was by her newfound trauma, which made it difficult for her to go outside at night. Smith was released from custody pending the results of a toxicology test, but the outcome of the case is unclear. 15. Kenny Ignasiak. An unidentified Wisconsin man was so upset when the driver of a Pontiac Grand Prix cut him off in Sturtevant one day in November 2016 that he followed his adversary into the parking lot of a nearby gas station. The man angrily confronted the driver, who was later identified as 34-year-old Kenny Ignasiak. It's unclear how the man expected the conversation to go, but to the rest of the world, it's not surprising that Ignasiak was unreceptive to being yelled at by a stranger. According to a police report, Ignasiak reversed into the man's car, then fled the parking lot only to return a few minutes later. By then, a pair of officers had arrived at the scene. Ignasiak initially denied striking the man's vehicle, but when one of the cops asked him why he returned to the scene, he allegedly said that he wanted to see how bad the damage was. At that point, Ignasiak admitted to striking the car, but an officer later noted that it didn't seem like the suspect understood the wrongfulness of his actions. Ignasiak was also sweating, had dilated pupils, and seemed extremely anxious, causing the cop to wonder if he'd been drinking or using drugs. In the meantime, the other officer explained to the angry man that Ignasiak would receive a reckless driving citation. This further upset the man, who believed Ignasiak deserved to be criminally charged. However, their conversation was interrupted by a sudden commotion near Ignasiak's vehicle. The officer looked over to see his partner pointing a taser at the suspect and instructing him to put something down. Ignasiak was allegedly cutting a line of what appeared to be cocaine. He ignored the officer's initial order to stop and was lowering his face to the powder as if he was about to snort it when the cops yelled at him again to stop. This time he complied, and he put the suspected drugs down under the threat of being tased. The police pulled Ignasiak out of his car and placed him under arrest. He allegedly admitted to using alcohol and cocaine earlier in the day, but when the officers asked him to consent to a blood draw, his response was F no. Ignasiak also argued that he didn't believe there was any law against driving around with cocaine. He was wrong, but a test quickly proved that the drug wasn't cocaine after all. Based on other items found in the man's car, police speculated that the substance was most likely a crushed-up oxycodone pill, which is also illegal for someone to have without a prescription. Records show that Ignasiak is no stranger to run-ins with the law. In this particular case, he pleaded guilty to an operating while intoxicated charge and possession of narcotics. Ignasiak was sentenced to 6 months of jail and 3 months of probation. He was also ordered to use an interlocking device for 2 years and to maintain absolute sobriety. 14. Mark Holland. A retired, world-renowned opera singer caused an entire nursing home in Lancashire, England to go into lockdown in 2023 when he went on a violent rampage armed with a bow and arrow. 63-year-old Mark Holland wanted to go shopping, which he normally had the freedom to do as a voluntary resident of the home in Lytham St Anne's. But workers were concerned over the amount of alcohol he was drinking and told him he couldn't leave, prompting him to launch into a destructive tirade. Holland allegedly exited his room naked and broke out into song, then retrieved his bow along with some metal-tipped arrows and threatened staff members with it. As employees evacuated residents from common areas and into the basement, Holland deployed fire extinguishers and broke doors. He also hurled concrete bricks at someone's car, causing an estimated £2,800 in damages. Fearing that the enraged crooner would take a hostage, police dispatched a specially trained negotiator and 3 other officers to the scene, where they were met by Holland's bow pointed straight at them. He attempted to shoot an arrow at the cops, but thankfully nobody was hit. The cops tased Holland 3 times before he backed down and returned to his room. He was arrested for his terrifying behavior, which ultimately landed him in prison for 6 months. Holland was also ordered to pay for the damages he caused and compensate the employees who participated in the evacuation. In court, the defense claimed that Holland was depressed due to his mother's recent death when he lost his temper. According to his attorney, his family believed that he was receiving the help he needed in jail, but it's unclear where he plans to live after he finishes serving his time. 13. Mora Fussel. Arlington, Virginia is home to numerous St. Patrick's Day pub crawls, the largest among them being the Shamrock Crawl. A few hours after the event ended in 2014, a naked woman showed up at the local jail demanding to see her husband, who'd been arrested earlier that day. Later identified as 26-year-old Mora Fussel, the unclothed and seemingly intoxicated visitor appeared around 11 p.m. She was reportedly given several opportunities to get dressed and call a taxi, but she refused and was booked into custody on charges of indecent exposure and public intoxication. If Fussel hoped to join her husband in the drunk tank, she was in for disappointment. Men and women are housed separately at the jail, and Fussel failed to achieve her mission of visiting her spouse. The couple was released the next day. Police spokesperson Dustin Sternbeck stated that he was unsure whether Fussel was a pub crawler, but that anybody who was in the area that afternoon was participating one way or another. He said that law enforcement gives drunk people the opportunity to call a cab in lieu of being arrested as often as they can during pub crawls. However, many attendees unwisely choose not to take a taxi. 12. Ross McDonald. During the early hours of the morning after Halloween in 2015, police in Iowa City, Iowa, pulled over a man for driving the wrong way down a one-way street. The first thing they noticed was that the suspect was wearing a flasher costume, consisting of a trench coat and a piece of cloth resembling a man's privates. According to law enforcement, the seemingly drunk motorist was confused and didn't seem to realize that he'd been driving the wrong way. He was also wearing several wristbands from local bars, indicating he was possibly on his way home from a night out drinking. 39-year-old Ross McDonald was allegedly incapable of telling the officers which bar he was coming from. The cops noticed telltale signs of intoxication, including slurred speech, bloodshot eyes, and difficulty maintaining balance. McDonald reportedly claimed that he'd only consumed 2 drinks, but his behavior suggested that he might have had more than he was admitting to. He was then taken down to a nearby drunk driving processing room. He refused to take a breathalyzer at first, but agreed to the test after eating a bunch of toilet paper, which he apparently believed would alter the results. However, McDonald was mistaken, and the test showed that he had twice the legal limit of alcohol in his system. Because he had 2 prior drunk driving convictions, McDonald was hit with a felony-level charge, which can carry a prison sentence of up to 5 years. 11. Mary Maloney. In early 2013, a woman fled the scene of an accident in her van after striking a pickup truck in Green Acres, Florida. A witness saw the crash occur at around 8:30 p.m. and followed the suspect to ensure that the police caught up with her. Responding officers confronted the suspect in a parking lot, where they reportedly found an empty container of wine in her vehicle and noticed a strong odor of alcohol on her breath. 53-year-old schoolteacher Mary Maloney allegedly showed several other telltale signs of intoxication, including glassy and bloodshot eyes. She was also accused of yelling obscenities at the responding officers and refusing to undergo any tests to determine her level of intoxication. Maloney was arrested on suspicion of driving under the influence, leaving the scene of a crash with damage, resisting an officer without violence, and driving with a suspended license. She was also charged with attempted bribery of a public servant for allegedly offering to perform intimate favors for the cop who drove her to jail. According to a police report, she also asked the transporting officer how much she had to pay him to let her go. It came as a surprise to many to learn that Maloney already had a felony DUI conviction on her record stemming from 2009. Her previous arrest came after an officer noticed her vehicle skidding into an intersection near the school where she worked as a math teacher. She was sentenced to probation but ended up serving 30 days in jail for violating the terms. Following Maloney's more recent arrest, it quickly became clear that the school board might not be as forgiving as they were after her first conviction. A district spokesperson said that the outcome of her criminal case would affect the board's decision over whether to suspend or fire her. In the end, Maloney was found guilty of all charges except the bribery count. In early 2014, the school officials voted to fire her, much to the relief of concerned parents who didn't think she had any business being a schoolteacher while letting her obvious issues go unaddressed. 10. Leonard Gardner. In early 2024, New Jersey-based news outlet TA Pinto released body cam footage of Bradley Beach Police Chief Leonard Gardner getting into a drunken scuffle with one of his officers at the scene of an accident. Just days later, Gardner resigned from the department and announced that he was retiring 6 months earlier than planned. The ordeal began during an emergency response to a car crash in November of 2023. Gardner arrived at the scene in his street clothes at around 10:30 p.m. and scolded Sergeant William Major for wearing a jacket with peeling police lettering. With more important issues at hand, Major removed the jacket and went back to dealing with the accident, but Gardner kept trying to persuade him to return to the sidewalk. The sergeant said he didn't have time to argue over a jacket, but Gardner persisted and grabbed his arm. Major grabbed the chief by his jacket and slammed him against the hood of a police car while shouting angrily at him for interfering with the investigation at hand. He then shoved Gita toward another cop and made a comment about how his boss was drunk again. Officers appeared to be holding Gita steady as he tried ordering them to remove Major from the scene. Major refused to back down to Gita, but at the end of the day, Gita was the police chief. He exercised his power to suspend Major, who cooperated and left the scene. Following an internal investigation, Gita was placed on administrative leave and Major was welcomed back to work. After the footage was released, angry citizens of the small town started a petition demanding Gita's dismissal. Being kept in the dark about the incident for 2 months caused them to lose trust in local leadership. And the borough council criticized Mayor Larry Fox for not involving them in the investigation or the decision-making process that followed. In this case, the court of public opinion prevailed when Gita decided to step down in light of the viral video. 9. Curtis Adam. Most cops have seen a lot of strange things, so it usually takes a lot to surprise one. A 35-year-old Tennessee man named Curtis Adam accomplished this feat in June of 2016 when he was busted at a drunk driving checkpoint outside Knoxville. He was wearing a skirt, leggings, and high heels and had a pink ribbon tied into his goatee. But the situation was about to take another unusual turn, which would make his getup seem ordinary in comparison. Adam allegedly reeked of alcohol, was unsteady on his feet, and performed poorly on a series of field sobriety tests. According to a police report, he admitted to drinking 4 or 5 shots before the traffic stop, and his blood alcohol content registered at more than twice the legal limit during a breathalyzer. While being taken into custody on suspicion of DUI, Adam informed Sergeant Dennis Smith that he needed to retrieve a key to unlock the chastity belt he was wearing on his privates. He explained that one of the keys was on his vehicle keychain. The other was on a necklace worn by his girlfriend, 44-year-old Rebecca Alexander, who was sitting in the front passenger seat in an allegedly highly intoxicated state. Sergeant Smith retrieved one of the keys and turned it over to staff at the Anderson County Jail. Employees didn't go into detail about how they went about removing the device, but it's likely safe to assume that they handled the situation in the least awkward way possible. 8. Alex Galchenyuk. After being nabbed in connection with a hit-and-run in Scottsdale, Arizona in July of 2023, professional hockey player Alex Galchenyuk behaved in ways that came at a heavy cost to his career, including the termination of his contract with the Arizona Coyotes. The intoxicated 29-year-old was accused of striking another vehicle, a curb, and a parking lot sign before fleeing the scene. Police found him lying on the ground with his father sitting in the driver's seat of the hockey player's BMW. However, they quickly determined that Alex had been driving at the time of the crash. Alex was captured on body cam footage as he threatened to end the arresting officer's bloodline with one phone call and said that they would die in the desert. He also allegedly hurled racial slurs at an African-American cop and mentioned his connections in Russia. And if that wasn't bad enough, he threatened to kill the officer's family members as he was being taken into custody. The Coyotes immediately terminated Alex's contract upon learning of his charges, which included hit and run, disorderly conduct, resisting arrest, threats, and failure to obey an officer. Ironically, Alex and his father had been out celebrating his 3rd signing with the Coyotes when the hit-and-run incident occurred. In a public apology issued several days after his arrest, Alex acknowledged the abhorrent nature of his drunken tirade and the fact that his behavior had ruined a major career opportunity. He also described feeling embarrassed and disappointed in himself for letting down his family, the hockey team, the team's fans, and law enforcement. Alex admitted that he had a long way to go before he expected people's faith in him to be restored, but he vowed to get his life back on track, starting with his entry into the NHL's Player Assistance Program. He pleaded guilty to a misdemeanor threatening count in exchange for the rest of his charges being dropped. He was ordered to attend alcohol abuse treatment in lieu of a 30-day suspended jail sentence. And additionally, the judge also ordered Alex to abstain from drinking for a year. 7. Cara Jean French. When you're a school bus driver, any alcohol before getting behind the wheel is too much. 59-year-old Cara Jean French allegedly had twice the legal amount of booze in her system when she drove her school bus off a roadway in Rush City, Minnesota in February of 2024. A local property owner dialed 911 after seeing the bus pinned against a basketball pole in their cornfield. According to an arrest report, a deputy noticed a moderate odor of alcohol on French's breath as she explained that her foot did not find the brake in an area where she normally turns the bus around. There were 45 students on the bus at the time, but thankfully nobody was injured. A mug in French's possession allegedly smelled like coffee with liquor added to it, but she claimed that she hadn't drunk alcohol in several days. She blew a 0.199 on a breathalyzer and was arrested on 2 counts of driving while intoxicated. Records show that French is not currently in custody, indicating that she posted bail while awaiting her next court date in May of 2024. 6. Randy Travis. It's hard to picture the seemingly soft-spoken country music legend Randy Travis acting belligerent toward a cop, but that's exactly what happened in August 2012 when he got drunk and crashed his Trans Am outside Tioga, Texas. Earlier that night, he'd entered a convenience store naked and tried to buy a pack of cigarettes. The 58-year-old singer was still naked when state troopers arrived at the scene. He initially tried to run away, but when the cops ordered him to come back, he demanded that the officers drive him home. Travis insisted he was as fine as a damn dandy, even after one of the troopers pointed out that he'd just been in a serious car wreck. While being handcuffed and taken into custody, the troubled musician wished cancer on one of the troopers, saying that he hoped the cop suffered from a cancerous growth that infects his bones and every part of his body. Travis went on to say that he knew a lot of people, including mobsters, and threatened to shoot and kill the troopers. There was a distinct odor of booze on his breath, but he refused to take a breathalyzer. A blood sample was taken, and the country crooner's blood alcohol level tested at nearly twice the legal limit. Travis pleaded guilty to driving under the influence and was sentenced to probation, but he seemed far more fearful of the consequences in the court of public opinion. For over 4 years following his arrest, Travis fought in court to block the release of his arrest footage, arguing in both state and federal lawsuits that making the video public would violate his privacy. But he ultimately lost the battle, and in 2017 the footage was released. Once it became available, Travis apologized for his behavior through his representative, who announced plans to continue suing the government for releasing the tape. Travis's life changed dramatically when he suffered a massive stroke the year following his DUI arrest. He underwent brain surgery and has had limited mobility and speech ever since. And while the arrest video shows a side of Travis that he clearly didn't want the public to see, he remains one of the most popular and highly respected country musicians of all time. 5. Austin Snider. An off-duty Ohio Department of Natural Resources officer jeopardized both his career and his freedom in early 2023. He was accused of shooting his parents during an argument at home in Batavia. Police were called to the scene at around 10:30 p.m. in response to a man being drunk and locked out of the residence. By the time officers arrived, 25-year-old Austin Snider had allegedly managed to enter the house and shoot his 51-year-old mother and 53-year-old father. But luckily, both victims survived their injuries. According to law enforcement, the Sniders said that they'd picked up their son because he was too drunk to drive, and that he went berserk destroying property in their home. Austin was found in the driveway, where officers ordered him to the ground at gunpoint. While placing him in the back of a cruiser, the cops smelled alcohol on him and noticed that his speech was slurred. He also had someone's blood on his hand, but said that he didn't remember what had happened when asked for an explanation. Police arrested Snider on suspicion of domestic violence, felonious assault, and using weapons while intoxicated. 6 months after the shooting, he pleaded guilty to the felonious assault charge and was sentenced to 7 to 9 years in prison. 4. Cheryl Bragg. In early 2022, a 54-year-old woman from Whitehaven, England named Cheryl Bragg was banned from being drunk and consuming alcohol in public, thanks to a court order resulting from her alcohol-related criminal behavior. But she continued to have run-ins with the law after having too much to drink, including twice in April of 2022. Both incidents reportedly involved Bragg being found passed out in people's yards. After being caught drunk in public at least 2 more times between then and June, Bragg was sentenced to 3 months in jail for her repeated violations. In January 2023, the troubled woman was arrested for her 11th violation after police received reports of her staggering around and swearing in the middle of the day. Responding officers found Bragg leaning against railings with a bottle of vodka in her hand, while a concerned elderly woman stood nearby and tried talking to her. During a subsequent court hearing, Bragg's lawyer claimed that his client got drunk because one of her friends stupidly gifted her a bottle of vodka. Urging the judge for leniency, the attorney further explained that Bragg had a lengthy history of trauma and lived in an unpleasant environment where she was subjected to dangerous and threatening people. The judge acknowledged that Bragg was vulnerable, but also considered how her behavior affected the public. He imposed a 12-month supervision order, along with a requirement to attend 3 months of alcohol treatment. Bragg's most recent arrest came in February of 2024, when she was seen crawling toward a road and yelling at strangers. She had reportedly been sober for 4 months before falling off the wagon and making her latest public scene. According to the Whitehaven News, Bragg needed help standing and walking from responding officers. Her eyes were glazed and her speech was slurred to the point where it was impossible to understand what she was saying. Following her arrest, she was ordered to undergo 120 days of alcohol monitoring, with the requirement that she remain completely sober in order to avoid returning to jail. Hopefully this time she can kick the habit for good. 3. Daniel Marchese. In February 2017, a University of Pittsburgh campus officer spotted a Buick sedan sitting in the middle of a busy intersection. Upon taking a closer look, he discovered a man who appeared to have passed out in the middle of pleasuring himself. The suspect's jogging pants were pulled down to mid-thigh level, revealing the pink lingerie he was wearing underneath. After putting the vehicle into park, the officer ordered the man to put his hands on the steering wheel. The indecent individual was later identified as 54-year-old Daniel Marchese. The suspect already had a lengthy rap sheet, which included previous arrests for drug possession, assault, disorderly conduct, public intoxication, theft, trespassing, and more. Marchese initially complied, but allegedly became uncooperative as he regained consciousness. Backup arrived just in time, as the suspected drunk driver exited the car and began spewing profanities at law enforcement. The cops placed him in handcuffs as he hurled derogatory remarks and insults, with a distinct odor of booze emanating from his mouth. According to an arrest report, Marchese struggled to maintain his balance while acting combative toward the officers. After becoming dead weight and being lowered to the ground, he allegedly began kicking, flailing, and trying to kick one of the policemen in the crotch. Marchese was accused of continuing to fight the cops while they brought him to his feet and placed him in the patrol vehicle. One officer was kicked in the abdomen twice before they finally got the suspect into the car, where he continued yelling profanities and banged his head against the window. Many initially combative suspects eventually stopped resisting when they finally realized that it's in their best interest to do so, but Marchese wasn't one of them. According to the report, the man continued to fight as he was placed in leg restraints. Inside the suspect's car, police found an open bottle of whiskey and 2 guns. Marchese was arrested on suspicion of indecent exposure, drunk driving, aggravated assault, receiving stolen property, gun possession, and making terroristic threats. 2. Mary Ellen Stewart. Most people feel bad at the mere thought of hauling an 81-year-old woman off to jail. But the law is the law, and deputies in Pinellas County, Florida did the right thing by holding Mary Ellen Stewart accountable for her actions. They caught her drinking straight out of a box of wine while sitting topless on a public bench in August of 2018. According to an arrest report, members of law enforcement approached the senior citizen outside a hospital in St. Petersburg shortly before 8 a.m. as she allegedly tipped her head beneath the spout of the box and began pouring wine into her mouth. When the deputies tried taking the wine away, Stewart shook the box toward them in an attempt to splash them with wine. The suspect had no prior criminal cases in Pinellas County, but there's a first time for everything. As a consequence of her alleged drunken behavior, Stewart was arrested on suspicion of misdemeanor disorderly intoxication. She was briefly held in custody before being released on her own recognizance ahead of her next court hearing. And now for number 1. But if you want to hear more bizarre and crazy stories, stay tuned after the video for some more content. 1. Dwayne Zimmerman. 45-year-old Dwayne Zimmerman's girlfriend was making pancakes outside their home in Brooksville, Florida late one night in 2019 when the couple suddenly began to argue. During the heated disagreement, Zimmerman allegedly threw a cooking pan and a bowl filled with pancake batter at the victim. The bowl shattered upon impact, leaving the woman's hair and clothing covered in batter, along with parts of the couple's enclosed porch. According to police, Zimmerman was intoxicated during the fight. He was ordered to have no contact with the victim and was booked into the Hernando County Jail on suspicion of felony battery. His bond was set at $2,000. It wasn't his first time in county lockup, given his extensive criminal history. Shortly before his latest arrest, Zimmerman had been apprehended on a misdemeanor battery charge for hitting his brother in the face inside his mobile home. He described the alleged act of violence as a little tap, but was convicted of the charge. The judge sentenced him to 3 days in jail and ordered him to pay a little over $1,000 in court costs. In October 2017, 2 years before the pancake batter incident, Zimmerman was arrested for misdemeanor battery based on allegations that he threw a gallon of ice cream at his sister's chest inside his mobile home while intoxicated. But prosecutors declined to pursue the case. Alcohol seems to be a resounding theme when it comes to past accusations against Zimmerman, whose rap sheet lists the name Mr. Perfect as a known alias. He has numerous prior arrests on his record, including for disorderly intoxication, drunk driving, grand theft, battery, and criminal mischief. He also has past charges of possession of narcotics and assault. Records indicate that he's not currently in state custody, suggesting that he's likely resolved his criminal cases and will hopefully steer clear of any further encounters with the law.
9. Dulce Ortiz. In April 2022, while responding to a call about a car crash in Harris County, Texas, sheriff's deputies heard from a witness that a young woman had driven straight over a curb and struck a sign in the neighborhood. By the time law enforcement showed up at the scene, the suspect had already fled on foot. To make the situation even more strange, witnesses claimed that a man came to the crash scene and tried to take the blame for the accident before police even got there. The driver, 21-year-old Dulce Ortiz, appeared on the scene while deputies were trying to figure the situation out. She allegedly showed some obvious signs of being intoxicated. So the decision was made to take her into custody. According to law enforcement, Ortiz tried to bribe a male deputy during her ride to jail, offering a few physical favors, if you get what we mean, in exchange for money. He declined, of course, and Ortiz was then charged with bribery on top of everything else. 8. Royal Scoop Daniel III. From the outside looking in, Royal Scoop Daniel III had everything he could ever want. He was wealthy, well-liked, and a successful real estate lawyer and financier in the resort town of Breckenridge, Colorado. Daniel made no effort to hide the fact that he enjoyed luxury. But he was also a philanthropist who seemed to care deeply about giving back to the community. At around 8:30 a.m. in April 2007, a coworker of Daniel's arrived at their office and discovered his dog, a freshly brewed pot of coffee, a broken pair of sunglasses, and a partially eaten bowl of cereal. But Daniel was nowhere to be found. His colleagues soon reported him missing that afternoon. Investigators later discovered a secret side to Daniel's life. The 60-something-year-old divorcee and father of 8 was accused of defrauding his clients out of more than $700,000. He was also deep in debt and behind on child support. When they searched his property, his motorcycle and passport were missing. Suspecting that Daniel disappeared on purpose to avoid his legal troubles, police issued an arrest warrant and the state of Colorado suspended his law license. Nobody saw or heard from him for almost 4 years, until he was caught trying to enter the U.S. on foot from Mexico. The entire time Daniel was gone, he kept a low profile and made a living as a freelancer. When he tried going back to the U.S. with his real passport, Daniel received a 12-year prison sentence. He apologized in court, but for many it was too little, too late. They felt betrayed and were now coming to terms with the realization that they had never known the real Scoop Daniel. 7. Saharat Sawang Jang. In Thailand, a drug dealing conviction comes with severe consequences, including but not limited to the death penalty. Understanding the risks involved, one 25-year-old kingpin went to extreme lengths to avoid getting caught and arrested, including going under the knife and having plastic surgery done to switch up his appearance. Saharat Sawanjang had already been arrested for dealing multiple times when he once again became a wanted fugitive in 2022. Police obtained a warrant after intercepting a package filled with a large amount of MDMA that was on its way to Sawanjang's apartment in Bangkok's Bang Na district. When law enforcement caught up with the young man just 3 months later, they had to do a double take just to make sure it was actually him. Sawanjang's once blemished skin had cleared up entirely, taking years off his appearance, and he also lost a considerable amount of weight. His face looked like a different person, so it made sense that recent witnesses had mistakenly described Sawanjang as an attractive South Korean man. He had gotten some work done on his face, and it seemed as if he deliberately altered his physical features to look stereotypically Korean. Sawanjang allegedly confessed to dealing drugs that he purchased on the dark web and paid for with cryptocurrency. He said that he planned to start a new life in South Korea under the name Jimin Sung, despite not knowing the language at all. Thankfully, that won't be happening anytime soon, since he's now in custody and facing a charge for importing narcotics. 6. Out-of-place alligator sighting. In southwestern New York, near the Pennsylvania border, the city of Jamestown is not the kind of place you'd expect to see an alligator. In fact, an alligator has probably never been spotted in Jamestown, period. But one shady character allegedly saw one of the beasts in the city's Panzarella Park in an attempt to distract police officers from arresting a fellow park-goer nearby. The strange incident happened at about 3 o'clock in the morning in August 2023. According to the authorities, a woman flagged down a few officers who were patrolling the park and claimed she saw an alligator in the nearby Chattacoin River. Apparently unfazed by what they most likely knew was not a real alligator sighting, the cops continued along their typical patrol route. They soon crossed paths with a 44-year-old local resident named Jason Goodwin, who they say was violating an order of protection. Further investigation reportedly revealed that the reported alligator sighting was a poorly thought-out attempt to lure officers away from Goodwin's location, so they wouldn't notice him in the park. At the time, the suspect had already been convicted of second-degree criminal contempt. He now faces additional charges of first-degree criminal contempt and aggravated family offense. 5. Robert Bobby Walls. Authorities in Brevard County, Florida, made well over 100 arrests throughout the first half of 2019 as part of a large-scale investigation into the area's bustling drug activity. But detectives weren't going to be fully satisfied until they captured one infamous man named Robert Bobby Walls, who had managed to evade arrest for weeks. Acting on a tip regarding the suspect's whereabouts, deputies staked out a local property with plans to make a forced entry. Before that could happen, though, a man with long, messy blonde hair left the home and hopped on a bicycle. Since the bike matched the description of Wall's bike, deputies paid extra close attention. It didn't take them that long to realize the man was actually Wall's, and that he was trying to disguise himself by wearing a bad wig. When confronted by law enforcement, Walls admitted his real identity and said he knew he was wanted. He also conceded that he wore the wig in hopes of throwing detectives off his trail. Walls was even honest enough to admit that if he knew investigators were staking out the residence, he would have tried to run into the nearby woods. But it was too late for that, and Walls cooperated as he was taken into custody. He was charged with conspiracy to possess a controlled substance, solicitation to sell a controlled substance, and unlawful use of a two-way device. 4. Daniel Christopher Booth. In 2020, 36-year-old Daniel Christopher Booth was working at a solar plant near Wellborn, Florida, when local law enforcement discovered that he had a few warrants out for his arrest after allegedly selling methamphetamine. A Suwannee County deputy paid him a visit at his workplace with plans to arrest him. But Booth wasn't going to go down easily. He escaped on foot and hid in a nearby pond, thinking he would just dunk his head underwater when he saw police and canines coming. In his mind, Booth may have been picturing the type of escape you'd see in an action movie. But a person can only hold their breath for so long, and Booth's plan quickly fell through when he had no choice but to surface for air in plain sight. He was soon captured and was taken to the local jail, soaked to the bone. On top of the charges he faced in connection to his warrants, Booth faced an additional count of resisting arrest without violence. 3. Shawn Miller. Throughout the course of an investigation into Cape Cod's drug trade that started back in 2015, detectives traced illicit activity to the Naughty Block Street Gang. More specifically, they discovered that the gang controlled the area's heroin trade. It took time for investigators to track down the organization and its players, who took extensive measures to hide their crimes. The group used different cars and safe houses, as well as disguises. While conducting surveillance on the home of a suspected gang member named Shawn Miller in Hyannis, police saw an old man coming and going from the house. At first, they didn't think it could be Miller since he was only 31 years old. But on a closer look, detectives realized that something seemed off about the senior citizen. They confronted the man, and by the end of the conversation, they peeled a shockingly lifelike mask off of Miller's head. He had been hiding in plain sight for weeks. During a search of Miller's property, police found 2 loaded guns and $30,000 in cash. He was also carrying $10,000 in cash on him. Federal authorities charged Miller with possession of heroin with intent to distribute and being a convicted felon in possession of a firearm. He pleaded guilty to both crimes and was sentenced to 7.5 years in prison, then 5 years of supervised release. Miller was one out of 19 alleged Naughty Block members who were charged in connection to the gang's alleged drug dealing and other activities. And while Miller's sentence may sound like a long time, it was nothing compared to the 28.5-year sentence one of the gang's other big players received. 2. Eric Frayne. When a fugitive is both smart and determined enough to stay on the run, it can be expensive to hunt them down. Pennsylvania authorities spent $12 million over a 48-day manhunt to find and capture a dangerous cop killer named Eric Frayne. During a late-night shift change at a Pennsylvania State Police barracks in the Pocono Mountains back in 2014, Frayne opened fire in the parking lot, killing 38-year-old Corporal Brian K. Dixon II and injuring Trooper Alex Douglas. Frayne left the scene and managed to avoid capture while investigators scrambled to get to the bottom of the terrible case. 3 days after the shooting, a vehicle belonging to Frayne's parents was found submerged in a local pond. Inside, police found Frayne's social security card, bullet casings, camouflage paint, and information about foreign embassies. Detectives thought that the suspect lost control of the car and crashed, instead of sinking it deliberately. Hundreds of law enforcement officers participated in the search for Frayne. They spotted him multiple times in the wilderness, but thanks to the challenging nature of the terrain, he kept getting away before the police caught up with him. Finally, over a month and a half after the shooting, a U.S. Marshals Special Operations Group apprehended Frayne near an abandoned airfield. He was taken into custody and charged with first-degree murder, attempted murder, assault of a law enforcement officer, 2 counts of terrorism, 2 counts of weapons of mass destruction, and more. In 2017, a jury found Frayne guilty on all charges and recommended he be given the death sentence. He remains on death row at a Pennsylvania state prison to this day, but it's unlikely that he'll ever actually be executed. Pennsylvania has not taken anyone's life since 1999, and while the death penalty still exists and is available in the state, it seems to be falling out of favor. The most important thing is that Frayne will never be free again. 1. Henry Krauss. Shortly after getting released from a New York State prison in 1992, career burglar Henry Krauss failed to show up to a meeting with his parole officer. Naturally, it wasn't long before authorities issued a warrant. But he was nowhere to be found, and his whereabouts remained a mystery for about 5 years. In 1997, road workers in Tompkins County saw smoke spewing from what looked like a brush pile in the nearby forest. They walked over to get a better look. As they got closer to the smoke, a rugged-looking man emerged from the ground and told them to go away. After exchanging some words back and forth, the workers conceded to the senior citizen's demands and left. They contacted authorities about the bizarre encounter. Environmental officers and a forest ranger responded. Just like the workers who discovered the site, they crossed paths with an old man. At first, the hermit angrily confronted the group, but he quickly realized he was outnumbered, so he surrendered peacefully. The man was Henry Krauss, and for more than 5 years, he lived in a crude underground bunker under the brush pile the workers saw smoke coming out of. It was a small space, measuring only 6 feet, 1.83 meters wide, and 5 feet, 1.5 meters high. In other words, a man of Krauss's size wouldn't have been able to stand up straight in the shelter, but the bunker was well insulated and served Krauss well. During a search of the makeshift home, law enforcement found a wood-burning stove and a handwritten log where Krauss tracked his activities. The logbook offered interesting insight into how the fugitive went undetected. He barely left during the winter to avoid leaving footprints in the snow. But during warmer seasons, he occasionally rode his bike to a nearby shop to stock up on supplies. Krauss sometimes even visited family and friends, who kept remarkably quiet about his whereabouts. And for living in the woods for so long, Krauss was surprisingly well-groomed. He was clean-shaven, brushed his teeth regularly, and kept up on his hygiene by taking baths in a nearby creek. But he couldn't hide in the woods forever. His capture meant trading his bunker for a prison cell.
Would you be more embarrassed for having a bit too much and sobbing over nothing in a highly public setting, or having too much liquid courage and trying too hard to seem tough, only to find out later that nobody was impressed? Let us know in the comments down below. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye!